That's so good. Yeah. So these playlists is kind of fun. I shared a playlist with a friend the other day, and I told him I was like, I think there's like 300 songs on this. I've been building it for years. Anybody else have playlists like this, where on Spotify or Apple Music, you just have so many songs on it? And I got to thinking about this. Like when you think about all these songs over the course of your life, some of these things just like they accumulate over time. Like songs that are meaningful or take you back to different places. And then there are songs too that that you hate the song, and also it's a part of you. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And it'll get stuck in your head, maybe something like this. Anybody ever had one of these? You know? You're welcome for the rest of the talk. That's where you're going to be thinking about, you know. I saw a video the other day. It was I think it was like a group that was playing like a gospel version of it at a wedding, and I was like, now we're talking. You know what I mean? Like. But you get these songs, I made the joke about Rebecca Black's Friday. A lot of people get Rickrolled. You got all this kind of stuff. Some of these songs, though, they get like NU. And have you ever found yourself like singing a song like this and not consciously thinking about it? Like you were just in line at Home Depot. I'm never at Home Depot in line, but maybe you're in line at Home Depot, and you just start singing something, and you're just like, where did that come from? Like Emily started playing Rebecca Black's Friday to our kids on the way to school on Fridays. And I love this. Like my kids will randomly sing it now in their heads. And it's like there's just something about these songs that just become like loops. They just become a part of you. They come out of you when you're not thinking about it. Some of these things just occur like that. And they're a lot like our thoughts, which is what we're going to be talking about. Like there are some things that you just kind of think about, and you don't think about the fact that you're thinking about it. And then you're also deeply thinking about it. You know what I mean? Like you randomly have thinking about maybe something that happened to you years ago that just popped up, and it's almost like this loop. Or sometimes you have things that you say, and you'll say them as if you're not even thinking about what you're saying. Like I told some people earlier today, I was like, sometimes I'll say the phrase, I'm tired, right? And that can mean I'm tired, but more often than not, it can mean any other emotion that I'm feeling that's negative. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like sometimes I'll say I'm tired and I'll mean like I'm sad. Or sometimes I'll say I'm tired and I'm just hungry. Sometimes I'll say I'm tired and I'm angry. And sometimes I'll say I'm tired and I'm hangry. You know what I mean? Like I'll have all those versions of it. And I'm just saying like I'm tired. And it's a loop that I have that just kind of repeats itself. And what's interesting about these thoughts and the things that we say and the phrases that we use is like these thoughts are a lot like seeds. And you've heard this before. This isn't like new information, but you know, your thoughts are like seeds, and these thoughts sort of grow. And when they grow into some version or form of an action. And then eventually that action becomes like a pattern that you have, and eventually that pattern makes up you. Now, what we do is we talk about how, what our actions are, they make us up in terms of like other people and how they view us. So you'll hear things when you're growing up, like how much your behavior matters and how it affects other people's view of you and your reputation. But the truth is, like, the more damaging part about this is that your actions and patterns of behavior and patterns of thought actually shape your own internal reputation of yourself too, which is so fascinating that the way that you think about yourself shapes just about every part of your life. The ways that you move, the ways that you do things, the things that you don't do, the things that you're afraid of. Like I was at a theme park when I was really young, and the theme park, the roller coaster got stuck. You ever seen one of these? The Batman roller coaster at Six Flags? Not that I remember it vividly, but vividly. And there's a little bit of this where I saw it, and I'll never forget, I saw it so young, and internally I made a personal commitment that people who do that are nuts. I'm never going to do it. And it was a thought pattern that just started and it grew, and every time I see like a big roller coaster that went upside down, I was like, that's great for them. But I remember Johnny hanging upside down on the Batman roller coaster, and I was going to do it, and it was like a loop that just sort of repeated. And here's what's so interesting. It affected me from like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old to 36. You know what I mean? Like I'm still thinking that when I see those things. It's a loop or a constant pattern. And those thought patterns are very powerful for us. Now, I'll say this. Some of you, as soon as we start thinking about or talking about thought patterns or these sorts of things, you immediately go to like a self-help kind of thing, which I totally get. Like you think I'm about to make you walk across fire coals or something. And I don't know if there's anything wrong with walking across fire coals, but I don't think that's the thing that I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about you mustering something up to be better. It's actually a deeply spiritual thing for us. Because you were given a gift, and the gift that you were given is the capacity to think about what you're thinking about. And when you pause to think about what you're thinking about, all of a sudden you can evaluate your thoughts from a perspective that really matters and is very deep to you. Now, the way that we're going to talk about this is we're going to talk about your thought patterns, but we're going to talk about them as if they're like soundtracks. Think of it like this. Just like these songs that we mentioned earlier, these thought patterns are like soundtracks that are constantly playing in your head. right? Have you ever been in the car with somebody else and they're playing music that you wish they weren't playing? And anybody ever reached to change it? Anybody ever done that? And got smacked along the way? Anybody else? Some of you are married and you're like, that was on the way in today. He hit Billy Ray Cyrus and I smacked his hand. Now, there's a little bit of that. Like, there's a piece of you that goes like, sometimes you feel this and you look at it, and what's fascinating is sometimes we operate as if we're the person in the passenger seat, that we don't have control over the radio or the songs that are playing in our head, but that's not true. It's your car. And there's a part of this that is your brain, it's your mind, and the soundtracks that play in your head. If we find ourselves disciplined enough, we actually have a lot of power and control over, but a lot of times we just don't. A lot of times we don't take the time to do it. Emily and I were talking last night, and I was telling her a little bit about what we were talking about. And I said some version of this. I was like, at the end of the day, sometimes it's not that I'm lazy. It's just that I just don't pause long enough. Sometimes it feels like we're too busy or we just get comfortable in what we're doing. But your unmanaged thoughts, I put it in my notes this way, your unmanaged thoughts can make you your biggest obstacle. Everything else that we point to and blame and look at and circumstances and people and the crazy people and your crazy uncle, everybody else that is a part of this, you can't control a lot of that. But most of our greatest obstacles in life aren't other people, and most of the time it's not even circumstances. Even if you've been through really painful stuff, that really matters. And at the same time, our approach to that and the ways that we think about how we think about those things matter. I put in my notes, I said this way, that negative thoughts, right? These negative thought patterns shape you more than you realize. Right? And ultimately, your positive thought patterns shape you more than you realize. And this goes beyond saying the right things in your head. And this goes beyond like mustering up belief in things. It's not that. And it even goes beyond just reframing. It's not simple reframing. It's thinking about what you think about and where is this actually taking me? And then the harder part of it is this actually true? Now, I'll put it in my notes too. I think of it like this. Sometimes I let myself think things because it's comfortable, and I know that it's not real or true. Anybody ever done that? This is like the moments that you have that fight with the person in your head, but you don't ever actually have it with them in person. And I'm a freaking Jedi when I do it in my head. You know, like 45 minutes after an argument, I'm like, like I'm so good. I'm so unbelievable. In the moment, I just make noises. You know what I mean? But in the midst of it, like later on, I think about this, and there are these loops. I've had arguments with people for years in my head. And I win every one of them. And it feels so good. There's a pleasure to some of the thought patterns that we have. But I put it in here, I said this, but there's often like a gap between what I know to be true and what I allow my brain to think about and dwell on. And so this is what I want you to do for a second. I want you to think about what are some of these like soundtracks in your own head, right? Like think about it when it comes to your family, right? If you think about this when it comes to your family, what are the soundtracks that play in your head? Like when you feel insecure about being a dad, or about being a spouse, or about like navigating your kids, what are the thought patterns that are playing for you? What are the things that feel like they're unmanageable and that you play? Sometimes for pleasure, sometimes because you don't take the time to process it, sometimes just because you just do that. What are those things in your family? This is true about faith. I talk about this a lot when it comes to faith, but faith is interesting in that we can hear something on TikTok or see a tweet or what I like to say like gotcha statements, you know what I mean? Like gotcha. And it's like half logic and it sounds really good and also it's not true. And we can adopt that and play it even if our life experience tells us that it's not true. And it affects the way that we interact with God. Like I remember growing up in a church and they made a version of a statement around how all of the good things that we do lead to God giving us more and more good things. And the implication in that is like, if I'm better, if I do all of the right things, then God is going to overwhelmingly just give me the things that I want. That's how it was interpreted. And also, it took me about 11 seconds to realize that isn't how it really works all the time. But that loop would just continue to play over the course of my life. Think about it when it comes to like leadership. Some of you walk into a room and you're a leader and you're a natural leader. And at the same time, the story loops or these soundtracks that play in your head cause you to feel insecure every time that you walk into a room and make you feel like it's based on your performance. And as soon as you do that, and you know this, as soon as that happens, you start performing more. You start becoming a little bit less real, a little bit less of who you are, a little bit less vulnerable because it's protective. And that story loop shapes your behavior. It's true in dating life. Anybody ever been on a bad date? Come on, be honest. Anybody ever been on a real bad date? Anybody? Y'all are lying. Some of you are like, yes, we did. You know what I mean? You're looking next to them. Like, there's a little bit of that, you know? And you think about this, like oftentimes those things that pop up in dates are actually insecurities that are connected to these soundtracks in our mind. And you can see it in other people, but sometimes it's really hard to see in ourselves. I say it this way, I was like, your courage and your confidence, and a lot of times your charisma, all those things are shaped by the soundtracks that you allow to play in your mind. Like some of you are responding with fake courage because you're mustering it up, but deep down it's just not there. Some of you, come on, this is always fascinating. You make great decisions for really bad reasons. You want to be viewed as somebody with integrity, but in your heart, you know that it's not coming out of a healthy place. You're just scared. You're scared about what would happen if they found out what you really thought. And so the question for us is not like, how do we just say the right thing? It's not even like, it's not even just how do we like muster it up or sometimes you like manifest these things in our lives. I don't think it works like that a lot of times. I think more times than not what it happens for us is that when we find the healthy place that God has called us to experience, all of a sudden it leads us to a safety and a courage that's actually rooted in, and I'm going to say this, you not having to work so hard to pretend to be who you're not. And this is one of those things that's a little bit freeing. And you find people like this, if you're seeing this, you find somebody who doesn't have all the soundtracks that sometimes we have. And you envy them a little bit, and they're a little bit more centered, and they're a little bit less concerned with what everybody thinks, and they're a little bit more just like, yeah, they roll with it a little bit different, and they seem to have more peace. And I think that the God of the universe, I think Jesus, when it comes to your life, wants you to live that way, where you're not living with lies and you're not living with mustering things up, and you've kind of done the heart work around this to find the peace that he's called you to have. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at one of my favorite passages of scripture that is simultaneously like oddly dark and really beautiful at the same time, right? It's a lot like a Metallica song. It's pretty great. You know what I mean? Am I right? Like it's a little bit like that. It's kind of got these two things. And the guy who wrote it is a guy named Paul. And if you're not familiar with Paul, wrote about half the New Testament, and it's so fun. He was a guy who was not just a part of persecuting Christians, but he oversaw some of those things. And then he has this amazing experience where he meets Jesus, follows Jesus, gives his life to Jesus, then begins to like launch churches all over the ancient world for people who weren't Jewish at the time. And so this was kind of happening, and there's all types of churches, and they have this argument about can they, and who's this for, and what does it look like, and you have all these fascinating things. It starts in some ways franchising the local church all over the ancient world. And then a lot of the writing that we have from Paul is Paul writing to these people going like, hey, here's what it looks like to follow Jesus, and please stop being stupid. Like that's the thesis of so much of his writing. It's just these two things. Like, here's what it means to follow Jesus and make better decisions, and here's what it looks like to live in the world in those ways. And so he writes to this group of people in an area of the world called Ephesus, and they have this church going. There's a lot of great things going on. And then he writes to them along these lines of their thought patterns, but he gets there by talking about their behaviors first. And here's what he says. This is Ephesians chapter 4. He says, so I tell you this, and I insist on it, which means like if I could sit you down over coffee and grab you by the collar, like I insist on this, right, in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. Now, he's not just talking about all Gentiles. He's writing to a specific group of people and writing about a segment of Gentiles who were sort of living this, not just duplicitous, but duplicitous in their internal thinking way of being. And then he says this. He says, they are darkened in their understanding, which is just so clear, Darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Which is like, dang, you know what I mean? There's a little bit of like, he gets after it. He's going to look, they are making decisions, don't miss this, because they have lost the sensitivity to know what is and is not, what is true and what is not true. That they have let their minds move them to a place, don't miss this, not where there's like get out of hell free card or not that, but like they have lost what it means to experience the life of God in the world. because of the ways that they're thinking. And he goes on, he says, having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over, right? Which again, is a fascinating thing. Because I grew up going, if you pray a prayer and then everything just immediately changes, then you're done and poof, and then you're a great human. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of that. And sometimes it happens just like that. But for most people, it's like a lifelong journey of where are you giving yourself to? And this group of people has given themselves over. They've given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed, which almost just feels like an amendment to it. And also, like your mama. You know what I mean? Like it feels like that. Like all of these things, and then this, and then he says, that, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with, and almost says, the truth that is in Jesus. Now, the implication here is so fascinating to me in that the truth that is in Jesus means that there are things that are not true that we adopt as well, which is what we collectively are seeing with this group of people. That in their heart and in their life and in the attachment of the deepest parts of their soul, they have adopted and brought along things that are lies in their life that has led them to a misalignment in what it means to follow Jesus. And then in verse 22, you get this fascinating sort of like, almost like a scalpel to the hearts of these people. He says this, he says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires. Now growing up, and even in my 20s and even early 30s at times, you read this passage and you go like, I'm just gonna set aside all my desires. But if you ever tried to set aside your desires, that lasts for about 17 seconds. You know what I mean? I can muster it up. I can pretend. I can do all of those things. But at the core of it, at the guts of those desires, is something that is often not true that's attached itself and tethered itself to our hearts. And this is, which makes what we're talking about so wildly important, because all of the felt need solutions that you look for when it comes to Jesus and life and your way of being a parent and your way of being a spouse and a friend and dating, all of these things get connected all the way back to what is driving all of it. And if what is driving it is a lie, and if what is driving it is a soundtrack that is untrue, then it will make its way all the way up the chain into your behavior. And I don't miss this. And then you get to a point in life where you rationalize it and get comfortable with that way of being. And the transformational work of Jesus disrupts all of it. And ultimately, you say it in this way, that your thoughts are now and will forever be your responsibility. Like in the same way that you got to pay your power bill or they turn it off, right? That's a responsibility you carry that carries consequences either way. And here's what's hard about this. This is a little bit less like a light bill and more about eating at McDonald's. You know what I mean? That I had this morning, that bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit with a medium Coke and a large black coffee. I'll just tell you, like that thing, you might not feel immediately, and it will affect you to a degree. That your thoughts, however comfortable with it that you are, will affect your life deeply, either now or slowly over time. And they are your responsibility and your responsibility alone. And so he says, look, you put off your old self, meaning that you pay attention to what matters in this. And then he goes on. You put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness, which means that your thoughts are your responsibility, but also your transformation will require you to have disciplined thoughts. Now, come on, you know this. What's hard about this is that disciplined thought doesn't come natural to any person. Like very few people wake up in the morning and go, here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to think about what I think about, you know? Like people don't do that. You know, maybe songwriters, I don't know. Poets do that. Artists do that stuff. But like the vast majority of us, we don't wake up and we go, oh, I'm going to think about what I'm going to think about. we wake up and go, Lucky Charms or Cheerios? You know what I mean? Like, that's my first thought. Actually, it's really not, but it should be. You know what I mean? Like, which one of those things is it going to be? We think about the responsibilities that we carry. We think about the pain that we feel. We think about our to-do list. We think about how we should have a to-do list and we don't, but those things still exist. We think about our responsibilities at work and what it means to be a good spouse and how do we make sure that our kids are fed and hopefully we have a great conversation with them. And many of us repeat the same day over and over and we don't think about what we think about. And disciplined thought, and this is what's so interesting, disciplined thought is actually the transformative work that Jesus calls us to. Disciplined thought is the way that the Holy Spirit works in us and through us. When I was growing up, I don't know if you guys were like this, if you grew up around church, they gave me a Bible when I was really young, something simple to read like the King James Version when I was 7, you know? These and thou and yeah, you know? Which is great to use on a date, by the way, like a first date. If you talked in the King James language on a first date, that's a Christian school joke. Anyway, but yeah, that's, you know. And you think about this, and they were like, I want you to read the Bible. And I was like, okay, so I would read it. And like something's gonna happen. And I'll tell you, sometimes it does. Sometimes you read the Bible and you're just like, dang, you know, like something, it's like it reads you in a powerful way. And that's really cool. And that happens sometimes, but the disciplined day in, like on a regular Tuesday, isn't just about picking it up and reading and praying, even though those things are great. It's about picking it up and reading and then reflecting. Like thinking about what you think about when it comes to this text. Thinking about what you think about when it comes to what does Jesus say and think about you. Thinking about what you think about when it comes to leadership and family and relationships. There's a discipline to it that goes far beyond just engaging in the text, even though that's a part of it. There's a discipline to prayer that goes beyond just saying whatever it is that you think about. God, give me a parking place at Target is fantastic prayer. And also rarely transformational. Sometimes, if they're busy, but most of the time not. Like there's a little bit of this that matters. There's a transformational work, and this is what's hard, that involves you. I don't know why it's this way, but Jesus rarely just smacks your heart into alignment. Now, sometimes that happens with life circumstances when all your control goes away. And then you have to do something, and it feels like he just came in and then you're just fully aligned. Whatever you want. But most random days during the week when you are practicing your faith, it's less about that and more about going, I'm going to think about what I'm thinking about as it pertains to my life and following Jesus. There's a passage, if you grew up around church, that you probably heard quoted to you. I heard this when I get to like middle school for the first time, you know, and I would hear these texts, and it's Paul still writing to a group of people. He's writing to a group of people in Rome this time. And he says this. He says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, view of God's mercy, and then he says this, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, most people that I grew up around use this as like so be pure with your body, and when you're dating, think about this, offer your body as a living sacrifice, which is great, and also it pertains to your brain too, you know? Like there's a part of this that's also going like the fullness of your tangible existence, your body, you offer all of it to Jesus as an act of worshiping him. Which is this way of going, you get all of me. You get my body, you get my mind, the tangible fullness of me. I'm going to give it to you and offer it back to you. And so he's encouraging these people in Rome. You offer the fullness of your tangible existence and your soul and your heart, all of it to God as a holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper act of worship. And you can go to the next one. Yeah, and it says this, do not conform. It gets after the guts of it. So do not conform to the pattern of this world or the ways of thinking and being that is accepted by most people living in the world. Many of you have heard this before. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by Jesus smacking your heart into submission. No. By everything that goes around you that forces you to do the right thing. No. By the discipline all the time. No. By renewing your mind, which means that if you want the transformation of Jesus in the fullness of your being, it's not about how hard you work, but so much of it is attached to your open-handedness and discipline around saying, I'm going to allow you to transform me. And however you view this work, right, the guts of this work is you going, what is a soundtrack that is a lie and not from him that I replace with truth. Which means whatever your behaviors are, I mean, you're all good people. I know some of you. Y'all are great people. And you can muster up good behavior, especially if the consequences feel big enough. And that's not it. It's 7, 8, 9, 10 layers back. You go, what drives that in you? Are you being transformed by the work of Jesus? So I'll tell you what I wanted to do. I was going to do like a 4.5-hour talk on this and give you all the things that I think you should do afterwards. You know what I mean? Like, here's the 9 steps to becoming, I don't know. But you didn't want to be here that long because an eclipse is happening tomorrow. And you're like, I got to rest before I look in the sky and it gets dark for 11 seconds. And then I got to go do something else. You know what I mean? So I totally get it. I get it. Sorry. And also, we're giving out glasses. I think it's the coolest thing in the world. So I'm going to be out there like 3 layers in. Like, wow, But what I wanted to do is do something a little bit different, a little bit odd for many of us. You don't come to church to get homework most of the time, but I'm going to give you homework, right? And it's not going to solve anything. So this is what I would say, like, this step doesn't solve anything for you. That's next week. So come back next week. Hey, next week we're going to talk about it. You don't get a 4-hour talk, but you come back next week and I'll give you the answer. But this is the first step, I think, for most of us in figuring out how do we do this well. And I've said this before, and I'll say it 1,000 times if you go to church here. The transformational, some people call it discipleship, the deep work around following Jesus, starts with you becoming an observer of your thoughts. Which means this, that if you could think about it as if like I am participating in the present moment, and then also I zoom out of the present moment to view me experiencing the present moment. I feel like Inception fast, but yeah. I want to do that thing more often. Which means that when you are in your board meeting or you're at the office and you're interacting with somebody, that you don't just participate in the present moment, that you're participating and thinking about your participation in the present moment. You're like, what? Because you get to. And the people that you admire the most, people who slide into 93 years old, having a life well lived, are generally the people who go, I am processing what I'm processing. And that is a gift that God gave you. This is part of our unique human existence. This is what makes part of our existence so beautiful and powerful, is that you get to think about what you think about. And as you do that, the question that you sort of wrestle through is, okay, I feel insecure here. Why do I feel insecure? And you zoom out and you get really honest about what it's connected to. I've said this before, like some of you grew up on like sports teams when you were a kid, and you can't memorize the preamble to anything, but you could quote the paragraph that coach said to you verbatim. And you don't know that you're responding to that with your insecurity, and also you're responding to that with your insecurity. Some of you, come on, this is part of my story. I grew up in a single parent home. I didn't see a dad in the home. Henry asked me the other night, he's very thoughtful. And he goes, he knows I didn't grow up without a dad in the home. And he said, what was it like to grow up without a dad in the home? And if you could pick, and this is such a great question, if you could pick any dad in the world, who would you pick? And it was so cool. And I'm 36. Number one, I didn't have a great answer to it. And then number two, I was like, how do I respond in a way that like gives clarity to it? And the first thing that came to my head was a coach. And I realized it's the only person I saw on a Saturday morning as a dad. And he made pancakes. And I can't make pancakes yet. No, that's not true. I can make some pretty good pancakes. But I thought to myself, I was like, my thought process around insecurity sometimes as a father gets all the way back to a moment of insecurity when I was like 11 years old and I watched Greg Brabham make his kids pancakes and me. You're like, man, that's a lot of deep thought. And I go, okay, but what is the truth around that? What does Jesus say about my capacity to do what he's called me to do, to be a father? That's the deep work. Is to be an observer of your thoughts, not just in the big moments, but in a discipline, in a way of thinking about your life and your thoughts and going, does this line up with what Jesus says? And so here's what I have you do this week. I'm not going to have you answer it. I'm not going to have you fill it with truth yet. Right? We'll do that later. But I want you to think about really 3 questions. And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to pull out your cell phones just for a second, because you and I both know that that's how you would take notes, right? So I'm going to ask you to do that. Pull out your cell phones for a second. I'm not going to ask you to do anything for me. So this is not anything for church. This is not text a number and get, nothing like that. This is 100% for you. Where are my Android users at? Do we have Android users in the room? Yeah? I want to see all my sinners. Where are they at? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Android users. I don't even know what's the Notes app called? Do y'all know what the Notes app called? Whatever that is for Android, pull that up. Yeah, it's probably Microsoft. Is it called Notes? Oh, yeah. Okay. You think you're better than me? I don't know. Yeah, okay. Pulls out iPhone. No. Pull out your Notes app, yeah. And then for the iPhone users, pull out your Notes app. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to pull it out, that Notes app, and I'm going to ask you to actually write down these 3 questions. First question is this, and I want you to think about this week. What typical negative emotions do you feel on a weekly basis? So I want you to write this question down. What typical negative emotions do you feel on a weekly basis? Now, some of you, especially those of you who are guys, ready? Guys, for a second, you need to Google words that are negative emotions. And I know this sounds weird. I know. I actually have a list of words that I have to look at sometimes to figure out what it is that I'm feeling. I told you sometimes I'm like, I feel tired, but I don't feel tired. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel weary. I didn't even have the word weary until I was in my 30s. Like, I knew what it meant. I never used it. And sometimes I just feel weird. You need to have a list of those words. And I want you to actually think about, what are the negative emotions that I might feel on a weekly basis, right? And just list them. And be honest. It's not the same as everybody's. It's likely not 40. For most of us, it's a handful. And then I want you to do it the opposite way. What are the positive emotions that I feel on a weekly basis? Like, what are those positive emotions? Like, some of you can't say this to anybody because you want to appear humble, but like sometimes you're just like really proud of the work that you do. And that's great. Like, I feel that sometimes. I'm like, man, I'm really proud. I can't say that to everybody because I want to be humble. But at the same time, I'm like, that's pretty good. You know, like, there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of the like 5-year-old in you that wants to show your parents that you're proud of something. That's great. You should be. What's that probably? What's the thing in you that you say, I just feel an unmatched joy when I do this? What's the thing you feel excited about? Like the Braves came back from a 6-0 deficit from the first inning yesterday, and I lost my freaking mind in the 8th inning, right? I'm so excited about it, and they're playing at 1:30, and I'm excited about it. What are you excited about? You know? What are things that actually make you excited? Think about those things. Maybe for you, and some of you, I joke about the negative. Some of you need to find positive words. Like, many of you don't have language around the positive things that you feel either. Like, what are those positive things that you feel? It's a deeply spiritual thing. So you go, I feel happy. I read a book by Bob Goff one time. Can I just be honest with you? Don't tell anybody that I said this. It made me so mad because he's so happy. I just want to smack him. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that. Like, and I laughed going like, but why? What makes that thing the dominant emotion that you would think about with that person? What's the dominant emotions that you're feeling? So if you think about the negative and the positive, most people, not all, but most people, the dominant set of emotions on a given week is negative emotions. And can I just tell you something? You ready? Everybody look at me for a second. If your dominant emotion is primarily negative, it will shape the fullness of your life. It doesn't mean you're a negative person. It will shape your courage, your charisma, your confidence, and what we prayed about with the revival thing earlier, your capacity to impact the world in a better way. If your dominant emotions are negative, now please don't miss this, you will parent differently. You will spouse differently. You will figure out what it is. What is that dominant emotion? Positive or negative, whatever this thing is, get the list. And then the third question is this. What soundtracks consistently play in your head? Now, here's why this matters, and this is where we're going to pick up next week. Don't miss this. Your positive and negative emotions are typically indicators of something that's a deeper story somewhere in you. Okay? I'm going to tell you why this isn't self-help in a second, right? I'm going to tell you, when you take it all the way back, there's a deeper narrative somewhere in you. And I think until you know it and name it, you can do nothing about it. It exists in your operating system as if it's a glitch in the software, right? So here's what I'm going to tell you. The hard work of this is knowing what it is and then going, what soundtracks play in my mind? Now, I do this once or twice a year. I almost think of it like, anybody remember like back when all PCs had viruses every 11 minutes. Do you remember this? Do you remember those days? Like, you open something on AOL.com and your computer shuts down. You know what I mean? Like, or whatever that is. And so I think of it like this. Like, I want antivirus software in my brain. So every year or so, I'll go through this, and I'll tell you what I do. I think about literally what we just talked about. And then I'll think about what are those narratives that I adopt. And I'll just tell you this. I do this all the time. There are dominant emotions that are telling a story about what I accept or believe and don't evaluate my thoughts on that shape so much of what I do. And you just pick them up. And oftentimes you pick them up without even knowing. So here's what I want you to do. We're not going to ask you to do anything other than answer these 3 questions. So I got ahead of myself. I want you to write down the first question. And then I want you to enter space, whatever it is that makes the lines go more. Give yourself like 10 of them. And then I want you to write the second one. So if you haven't done that yet, write the second one. And then enter space all the way down. I want you to write the third one. Now, last thing I'm going to ask you to do with your cell phones out. Keep your cell phones out. Some of you you're just so disciplined. What you're going to do is you're going to go, he told me to do it. I know when I'm going to do it. And you're going to do it. And you already know when you're going to do it. And then the rest of us, being the other 96% of us in the room, need to pull out our calendar app right now. So just pull out your calendar app. And you put it on your calendar. You can put your date on your calendar. You put that weird meeting with your boss on your calendar. Put this on your calendar. 15 minutes. That had to be an hour. 15 minutes. What's 15 minutes of you answering these 3 questions, which you put on your calendar? And then those of you in the room who are like me, who would do this. I'm going to pick up my phone so he thinks that I'm doing it, but I'm actually not going to do it. You're sitting next to a spouse who knows you just did that. And so spouses nudge them and go, I'll tell you when you're going to do it. So go ahead and just do that too, right? So some of you need to ask for a reminder from someone who cares about you. Great. Put that in there however it is that you do it. And then here's your homework. 15 minutes this week. I want you to come back next week, and I want you to go, here's the soundtracks that are playing in my head. Would you be able to pull up this notes app? Here's the soundtracks that are playing in my head. Here's the dominant emotions that I feel, positively and negatively. And then next week, we're going to solve all your problems. That's not true. That's not what we're going to do. Next week, what I'm going to do, and I'll tell you where we're going to go. Next week, what I want to do is I want to talk about where they come from and who we're trying to answer these things with. And then the last week, we're going to Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan and don't get home, right? So that's our goal. So with that, let me pray for us, and then we'll send you out. And we'll head out from there. Father, thank you so much that you care enough about us to give us one of the most beautiful gifts of our lives, of being able to think about what we think about. That the crux of part of our humanity is that we get consciousness, and then consciousness about our consciousness, which is so cool. And at least for me, probably for many of us, I don't steward that well sometimes. And so I just ask that you would help us to steward it. This amazing gift that you gave us, God, I pray that you would help us to kind of do the chiseling out of our heart to find out what the lies are this week. At least think about it. Figure out where our dominant emotions and pay attention to those things. God, for the person in the room who the dominant emotion is some version of fear or uncertainty or pain, God, I pray that you would help them to know that it exists, even if it exists at a low-grade constant level. And I pray that you give them the clarity on what it is and what soundtracks are playing. For the person who feels, insecure or not valuable or some of those kinds of things, God, I pray that you would unearth that and help them to be really honest, even if it's painful, about what exists, and help us to figure out what those soundtracks are. What are the loops that are playing in our head that remind us of things that just aren't true? And God, I pray in a very powerful way for the 15 minutes that so many people committed to. God, you show up supernaturally in so many different areas. But sometimes we forget that sometimes you just show up supernaturally in intangible ways, in simple moments as well. I just ask that you would do that. And over the course of the next few weeks, foundationally, I pray that you would do the transformative work that I believe only you can do, and that this process would just make us open to it. God, we love you and we thank you. It's in Jesus' name we pray.